I'm Methil Devika, a practitioner academic of dance and a transdisciplinary artist with around 3 decades of experience as a creator performer. Um, 30 years ago, when I started off working with the medium of Mohiniyattam, I remember a male critic come to me and say, Mohiniyattam is only the dance to be danced by the Nayars, which is a caste. And he said that is because they were predominant practitioners of the art form at a certain time in history, and it was rightfully theirs. Although debates on cultural appropriation would have seen it in varying validity, uh, I kind of read in between those lines. I found it very casteist, and I also thought there was a predominant male voyeuristic gaze. Perhaps unintentional, but it was powerful enough for me to actually stop giving so much of overemphasis to Sringara. And therefore, there were a lot of other work that I started doing. There was one work I remember, which was a conversation between the Gopika and Krishna, where Gopika says, I don't want to go home. My husband is there. My son is there. I'm only thinking about you. And I'm so attracted to you. And Krishna says, I am alluring to you only because you have that. If you didn't have that, you would have cared two hoots for me. And there Krishna was portrayed not just as a person or a god. For me, it was passion. It was an interest that you have in something where the other things seem so mundane. Some people saw it as an extramarital affair, but if it was aesthetically great, it was good. Recently, I did a work called Bhatramata, which is a conversation between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. And I found that the men in the audience were very disquieted, although the women felt great. It was a satire, and I would give it with a disclaimer saying it has no resemblance to anybody living or dead, on stage or off stage. I also did a work called Uchila, which talks about a 12-year-old girl who questions the authenticity of knowledge itself, right? And she asks the men in her community, പാമരന്മാരുടെ പാണ്ഡിത്യമോ പണ്ഡിതന്മാരുടെ പാമരത്വമോ ഏതാണ് ഈ ദേശത്തിന് ഏറ്റവും മഹാവ്യാധി? Loosely translated into English as, is it the wisdom of the so-called people who, is it the wisdom of the ignorant or the ignorance of the so-called people who think they're knowledgeable? Which is more a bane to the society? And through that work, I not only intimidated the men in the story, but also I found a lot of people were intimidated in the audience also. Two politicians came to me and said, no, don't do this, right? And I said, I will do it. So any conflict that you build into a narrative, it will be palpable in your audience, and you know that your work is powerful. Now, this is what you do on stage. Imagine a scenario that I come out of the dance fraternity and present my work to other spaces. Okay, take site-specific work. So recently, for my postdoctoral fellowship, I've been doing work with temple terrain. Why temple terrain? Because the challenges are huge, and as a woman. So I love working with the sacred ecology of the space, with me and even my students. When the students come in, the challenges are much more because they come from different communities. And I try and co-create work in that site, right? So the temple becomes an active co-actor. And there are so many challenges thrown onto you. And what I do is I conform. I'm so obedient because I want those uncertainties and challenges to define and redefine my work. So the more I conform, the more I have to let go of these prejudices I have about art that has been handed over to us. And what comes is this beautiful, totally improvisational work. Recently, I went to the Himalayas to do a work piece when there was a talk of war. It was against the light of the Pahalgam attack. And we were there in the Himalayas. I was working in the monasteries, doing a work on Buddha. And every time a drone went up, we had people from the BSF coming from the Indo-China border. And the lack of oxygen there, the terrain itself, the climatic conditions, I had to keep cutting to recalibrate my dance according to a very different set of challenges. So what happens is you're generating, we call it generative dancing. It's a very sociological term. And you keep generating, right? Talk about the disabled space. I did a work for uh, the deaf and hard of hearing community. I usually bring my corpus of choreographies to them. And for that, I also use their language because the moment I use their sign language, they are not disabled anymore, they are abled. So this was featured in the international festivals of Goa and Mumbai, and they put an accessibility and inclusive segment for that festival. And I felt that it would have been much greater if they had not compartmentalized a segment separately for the disabled, but actually put it in place within the abled sector, right? So often inclusivity, inclusion, accessibility seem to be buzzwords today to rake in a lot of large grants. But what is inclusion? It's not about giving a disabled a space, or it is not about, giving this subaltern community an opportunity, but it is about this co-choreography that you have with them, they in their own space, with their strengths, we in our own space, with our limitations and strengths, and going into this horizontal dialogue where you dismantle all gatekeeping or hierarchy. And that is inclusion. And to be very honest, I have many times been excluded from my own artistic fraternity, and I have found that exclusion so powerful. You don't need to be included to be powerful. Now, let us get into the education space. National education policy was implemented, and I did a work on arts integrated science projects. And when you get into cross-domain work in a different place like science, you're also dealing with people who think they know a lot on art, but actually the nuances are not much known. I'll give you a simple example. What was last year? Can you tell me? I hear people talk about it. Is it this? This was not last year. It's not the opposite of Tandava either, originally. So what is Tandava? Is it powerful dance? No. Is there a feminine and masculine aspect to it? Yes. You cannot understand these terms without knowing Indian metaphysics. What is nritta, translated as pure dance? It's been handed over to us in textbooks. It's a wrong translation of nritta. Navarasas, for example, it's not about me standing here and recklessly showing 9 emotions, tuck, tuck, tuck. If I want to make you laugh, if I want to have a manifestation of hasya, if I'm going to smile here, you're not, or laugh or make a funny face, you're not going to laugh. On the contrary, I could probably cry absurdly and you will laugh. So that's rasa. So to get these terminologies understandable in such a space itself has been so difficult for me that often I feel even disciplines are gendered. Art is often a non-science, thank goodness not a nonsense, a non-science subject. And performing arts is often seen as more feminine than science. And therefore it also enforces a kind of, patriarchal hierarchy even there, innately, unknowingly. And this is something I have faced. So it is very important when you talk about IKS, when you talk about NEP, to have interdisciplinary expert evaluators in the stream. Otherwise, they will never understand the gravity or the intensity of what you do. So I worked with schizophrenic patients around 2 decades ago, and I remember asking them to enact a moment from their lives, a very important moment from their lives. And we gave a script for that, and they ended up, most of the time, not acting or using the improvisations they were supposed to, but they ended up being overwhelmed in their emotion. But after repetitions, one would find that they would slowly refocus from this lived, experienced emotion to more of physical acting. And the moment they move into physical acting, then they're looking at their own life as an observer, and that experience as an observer. And there comes release. Release is a term that is used in Western aesthetics. In India, it was much more, it was realization. And this, so when I put a topic for NEP, if I'm going to say rasa, induced, or deduced through psychosomatic patterns to enable release. If the person there does not know the actual nuances of rasa, you're talking to the wrong audience, basically. So most of the time, concepts and all are just often said because they hear people say. But I think today is the day that you have to really start questioning. As a practice-led researcher, which is very different from a practice-based researcher, I often hear people in the panel asking me, what theory are you going to base your study against? And I say, excuse me, the theory will emerge eventually. And sometimes the research can benefit your own practice itself. You don't need to have a theory. If you want, you can go into AI and find an aligning theory and they'll be happy. But is that the way to go about it? When I was doing a work on Balarama Bharatam, it was my first research in the year 2002 from the Ministry of Culture. And we had always believed in textbooks that Balarama Bharatam, which is supposed to be compiled here in the Kingdom of Travancore, had links with Mohiniyattam. And at the end of the study, I gave them a report at the study, but I gave them a report saying, I don't think this has any relationship with Mohiniyattam at all, for that matter. None of the art forms mentioned in that has any relationship with any Keralite art form. And that was not a text that was even written long ago. I mean, it was fairly in the latter half of the medieval period. So it held only as much significance that it would hold where you take any other medieval text or lexicon on dance and maybe correlate it to any other art form. Natya Shastra, for example, is not a monogenetic text. I hear people say, to try and link everything to the Natya Shastra. Of course, it has this expanse of epistemology, but cannot be didactic. So the will to question, the will to think, the will to judge. We don't really own our art form. If people say they've invented an art form, full sympathies to them. Art is always a copy of something else, which is a copy of something else. So I remember interviewing the last Devadasi of Jagannath Temple in the year 2010, and she was very witty. She was old, and she told me, I am Jagannath Ji, Jagannath Ji's wife, Mohalla Ki Nari. That is why I'm called Mahari. Mahari is also, an art form from which Odissi came. So she says, I'm Mohalla Ki Nari. I'm married to Jagannath Ji. Who are you? So she thinks every artist is married to the Lord or some deity. And she said, who are you married to? And I said, yo, Narayana. And then she said, oh, Narayana. And I remember writing an article about this at a very famous English newspaper here. And I had mentioned that today's dancers owe a great deal to these custodians of knowledge, because she was creating songs as and when I was talking to her, right? And people make money. Today's dancers make money out of them. There are no credits. And this particular line was excluded from the paper. Perhaps I realized that back in 2010, I had perhaps triggered a very strong or sensitive socio-cultural, political debate right there. So who are the owners? Who are the creditors? These are all things to be deliberated upon. Well, I think the power of voice is very important. Like in Uchila was silent, but she had voice. The voice was an action. And for me, it is really not about me being a traditionalist or a purist. It's very easy to transit between everything in a single concert. But for me, dance is an inquiry, which is not didactic. And where, organically insights could emerge about human relationships and even about the self. It has presence, it has possibility. And today we are only as good as our gadgets and our notifications. So try switching your phone, telling people that you're going to be not going to be using the phone for the next 4 or 5 months, and you will actually see how many people come looking for you and how many times in that 5 months. So during that age, I always feel art is like a companion, and it's like a true friend which mirrors your vulnerabilities over the years and over the decades, and it tells you different things. It argues with you, but you, like a friend, you have no other go but to actually listen to it, and because you don't want to let go, right? So these are certain uncomfortable conversations that happen in dance, and I would like to say In the context of our local mission and global vision, all I can say is I was able to create Sarpatattvam, a film that was screened at the Oscar contention list in 2018. And today, just coming from Palakkad, a village, and working with a small time, beautiful art form called Mohiniyattam, with a lot of problems and with a lot of decision makers there, I was even able to get the Australian PR as a distinguished talent even before I went to Australia. So I think that's the power of generative dancing. And not that it was done willfully, it was so organic because you learn to question and you learn to critique yourself. Thank you so much.